So we're going to take you through some hip mobility, and we're going to start with rolling out here on the foam rollers first. Now there's no exact science to foam rolling. There's some guidelines you can use, but more so it's going to be based off of how you feel while you're doing it. If you don't feel like you're getting enough tension with just rolling out with your leg straight, you can cross your leg over like I did. Puts a little bit more tension through your glutes and your hip rotators. And you're going to want to do both the right and the left side here when you're doing this. Now me personally, I tend to prefer using a ball. So I'm going to switch over to that little ball that's next to me here. And that's about the size of a softball, but that's actually a pretty dense foam. A softball will work, but it's going to be pretty aggressive. As you can see, my face, it gets in there pretty deep, and you will definitely feel it. But you want to kind of use that ball to work around the bony prominences. So your butt bone, what we call your ischial tuberosity, and that bone sticking outside of your hip, your trochanter there. And also the ball allows you to work below the iliac crest through your hip abductors. So I tend to prefer a foam ball for working through your hips and your glutes a little bit more than a foam roller. Now one thing I don't show here is working down into your hamstrings, but it's going to be the same idea. You're going to want to find an area that's a little bit sore and spend a little bit of time just kind of rocking back and forth and massaging out that area. Getting on to the front side here, we're showing you how to roll out your quads, your TFL, and your adductors. I did not say your psoas because the bulk of that muscle is actually up in your trunk, and there's no way you're getting on that with a foam roller. So use the foam roller just like the glutes, just to kind of explore at first, to look for tight areas where you're a little bit more sensitive, kind of figure out where you need to work through. I tend to work outside the leg, back to inside, back to outside. And something I like to do is when I find an area that's tight is pin it and use some motion here, like I'm just bending my knee to help kind of massage that out. Now it's important when you're doing this to really make sure you keep your core engaged. It's really easy to let your back sag. You can give yourself some back problems. Now what I'm showing you here, I'm actually rolling while moving at the same time. So I'm rolling while I'm flexing my knee. That, for me personally, just feels like it really does a good job at loosening up my quads. Again, there's no exact science to foam rolling, so do what works for you, kind of find what feels best. It doesn't need to be torture, but it probably needs to be a little uncomfortable. Here we're going to show you some hip stretches. This first one is just a posterior stretch for the back part of your glutes, posterior capsule. I'm showing you where you should be feeling it, so it should feel like your femur is almost getting pushed out the back of your hip. Now what I'm doing is I'm putting all the weight onto my front knee, which is my right knee in this video. Now if you're not getting a stretch there, you can do what I just did and use your left knee to kind of push your right shin up into more of an angle. That'll increase the tension on your glute fibers. We're going to show you this again on the other side here. I lied. We're going straight back into a pigeon lunge. So you can do the same thing on the other side. Just rewind the video if you need. But if you're familiar with yoga, here's a pigeon lunge. You're just going to drop your left leg going straight back. You want to keep your hips square and reach long with that left leg or whatever leg's behind you. You don't have to fold over like I did. I tend to relax there because it's more comfortable. If you need a little bit more of a stretch, you can bring that shin up like I did. That intensifies it quite a bit, but try to breathe and relax into this stretch. Another yoga pose I like to use is the dragon pose here. I prefer to do this with my knee resting on the ground just so I can really relax into the stretch. You can do it with your knee lifted, but it's a little bit more active. I really like to use the breathing to help my back expand and allow my exhales to get me to sink into the stretch. And here we're just showing you the same thing on the left side so you can get a little bit of a different view here. Again, in terms of your stretch duration, somewhere between 30 to 60 seconds. I typically like to count 5 to 10 breaths. Here we're showing you a self hip mobe. I have a super band wrapped around the inside of my hip and pulled up as high as I can into my groin. Keeping a nice engaged core, I'm going to sit my hips back as far as I can before I get any pinching in my groin or the front of my hip, kind of around the hip flexor area. If you're getting pinching, you need to stop. That is not a stretch. So again, we're just using that band to rock back. That band is angled out basically at a 6 or 7, probably a 7 o'clock direction. 6 would be straight back, but a 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock direction. Here we're doing a hip flexor stretch and making sure we're engaging our core and our glute properly. So I'm just setting this up here. You could use a couch at home, a bench, whatever. But the most important thing is we have a straight line going from your knee to your hip, and you have your core set and engaged. That psoas will pull your lumbar into extension if you do not set it. The cherry on top is getting your glute engaged once you get into this position, and hold them for about 30 seconds to a minute.